Here comes the men in white. Galaxy Defenders. Uh-oh.
Marvin
Nah,
and I,
before
we're doing
go ahead.
everything color coordinated.
We hopped on and we made fun and we were like, oh, we both got white on today. Said, yeah, we're not men in black, we're men in white. Ebony and ivory, bitch.
Ebony and Ivory. A lot of 80s throwbacks. Jeez Louise.
No, let me stop. So we are back. As you guys know, I've been doing the map of consciousness from Hawkins, and we have been treading so softly up this map from, from shame, guilt, grief, apathy, fear, desire, anger, pride, and courage. And now we are in the zone, what's known as reason and integrity. And in the zone of reason and integrity, there's neutrality, willingness, and acceptance. Neutrality coming in at a whopping 250
Ooh,
on the energetic log. Big way from 20 from shame.
we've
Shame again
got
at the
we've gone
bottom.
a long way, baby.
So neutrality, we have now reached the neutral stage right above courage, where this is the state where stuff starts to happen. Now, if you're at the bottom in the survival paradigm, like we talked about before, you can 1000% in a weird way, you can definitely still manifest stuff, but you're probably going to feel like shit and you're probably not going to keep that stuff. A lot of people, in my opinion, you let me know how you feel, Tim, when they're in the survival paradigm, when they're in shame, guilt, apathy, and they're trying to manifest stuff, they're doing stuff from a place of desperation and lack, whether it's affirmations or whatever. And stuff can come in, they can get some sort of movement, but in that state, it's like walking uphill. It's like swimming upstream.
Yeah.
And so it's 10 times harder and it doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel easy. And eventually you get tired walking up that hill or swimming upstream and you slide back down that hill. Is what gets people to the neutrality state, in my opinion.
What was that
Because
last thing you cut off for 1 sec, Marv? What gets them to neutrality?
I say when they go up that hill, and then what inevitably ends up happening is they end up sliding down that hill. And when they slide down that hill in a weird way, that gets them to the neutrality stage. Because now they're going with the current instead of flowing up the current. And so now they realize instead of climbing up this hill like that, I just got to flow with the hill. Just slide. Just don't make it harder than it has to be. And I think a lot of people go through that in order to get to the neutrality stage, to be able to get to that stage of being able to trust, and then satisfactory and enabling and release, as Hawkins talks about. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and touch on some things when it comes to neutrality, and this, you could say in a way being the zero state, we like to use that word, all these terms, zero state, when you're in that neutral state, is a good place to be when you're trying to manifest anything, let alone a SP. So
Yeah. I mean, again, what's problematic about the David Hawkins map is, in my opinion, when it's interpreted so literally, which
right.
we can blame Hawkins for that in many ways. But he gave all these examples always of going up and down the map. For instance, he talks about like, walking in the woods and opening up a door and a rattlesnake being right in front of him. And he was like, I immediately was in that like terror state of fear, whatever that is on the map, very low, right? But I would also immediately let go because I didn't have a choice. I knew I would die if I didn't. So like he's like, I really quickly went from like 50 up to 500 or whatever. And he goes, there was this great like peace between me and the rattlesnake, right? And then the rattlesnake slithered away and he went back on his walk. And I think Hawkins probably dipped down back to a lower level than 500 or 600, wherever he was at. I like stories when he talks about it like that, and about like getting angry. And he's like, well, what are you supposed to do? We're just human. You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to like this, like, we're rising in consciousness. And like, it wouldn't be as big a deal, but the way that the LOA New Age community is that there's so much spiritual bypassing where they're like, I'm just elevating to 300, 400, 500, 600. And again, Hawkins plays into this. we don't play favorites, even though we love David Hawkins. Like the muscle calibration shit, like telling people like, oh, you're 600, you're 720, like that lends itself to fucking bypassing. Um, but all of that said, in a figurative way, in a metaphorical way, the map's hugely helpful. And what Hawkins talks about a lot, again, I'll go back to chapter 1 and 2 of letting go, particularly chapter 2. He says letting go is a natural human response. It's a natural, you say, almost physiological response. So like if you're going up a hill trying to get over something and you can't, there's all this resistance, you inevitably fall down that hill and become neutral about it. It's just like the world's way, the universe's way, the body's way of checking yourself, of kind of evening things out. You know, like in reality transurfing, which I don't pretend to be like hugely into, but it's, you know, a very interesting book. It has a lot of cool concepts on it. Like he talks all about pendulums, and like the idea of a pendulum is very similar. Like if you go to either extreme, it inevitably gets evened out. And the letting go process and kind of like reaching that state of neutrality is it's a normative process, like a process of homeostasis and a process of like of letting go in just a very pure way. So we're all doing that to some degree or another. Now, if you're in fear or shame, or, you know, one of these real low level, you know, 20, 40, 50, whatever on the scale, it's going to be a lot more painful and harder for you to do that. And I think one thing that Hawkins is saying, when you get up into these 200s range, you are much more go with the flow. You're much more easygoing. You're much more like, I would like it to happen, but it's fine if it doesn't, you know? And that neutrality is obviously something that a lot of us want to cultivate. And it's something that really, you know, goes hand in hand with a lot of mystical traditions, a lot of traditions like Taoism and Zen. And it's the kind of thing that it's sorely lacking in most romantic relationships when there are a lot of issues, like when there's SP situations, right? A lot of our clients, like there's not that neutrality. Because if there's that neutrality, it's like, you know, we posted on my channel just recently our interview with one of our clients, E, and like she had neutrality. It's okay if I get him back. It's okay if I don't. This is about me. And that's like she, like, you know, she's calibrating into 200s or higher when she's like that, right? Most people with SP problems, serious problems, are not there. Frankly, they're below 200 more of the time. I am rambling here, but at the same time, I feel like I'm making beautiful sense. Us with our
No, you're not rambling.
So yeah, I mean, that's neutrality is something that, especially for people with romantic relationship issues, it's something generally speaking that we want to cultivate. And there's so many ways to cultivate it. Popular ways that are great are things like Ho'oponopono, meditation, breathing exercises, other mindfulness exercises. If you want to use more of a therapeutic approach, you know, you could even say something like CBT or something like that. These are different ways to become more neutral about the situation, more of the observer, and be like, it's okay if it happens, it's okay if it doesn't.
I agree. And the pendulum point is very key because it's I always tell people life is about balance. That's something I always tell people. I tell people that all the time. You probably heard me say it in past videos. Life, to me, if you look at life, if you look at nature, you look, you know, it's funny. Recently, I've been looking at AMC, the channel AMC, and they have that movie The Day After Tomorrow always on, which came out years ago. I remember going to see that when I was in school, when I'm over 20 years ago. But um, life is about balance. You see, when nature gets out of balance, the weather will start acting up, right? You'll see the weather start going crazy when things aren't in balance. You see the animals start going crazy. The animals know before we know, because they have they have a built-in mechanism, whatever God, universe, whatever you want to call it, gave the animals. They have a knowing when stuff is out of whack and stuff's not normal. And I remember when the eclipse happened last year, and I went to Canada with my girlfriend. The animals were acting crazy. The birds in the sky, when it got dark out during the day, I remember seeing them flying around, and you could tell they were thinking to themselves, what's going on? This isn't normal. It's not supposed to be dark out right now. Why is this happening? And so they know. And again, when nature is out of balance, you have these catastrophic events happening. When your body's out of balance, your body has these catastrophic events happen. You get sick, whatever disease comes up, because it's your body's way of telling you need to get back in balance. You need to go back to homeostasis or whatever the case. And manifesting is the same way. It's the same way in politics. Something swings too far to the left. We saw what happened this year in the election. Shit swung way too far. People were sick of it. Same thing's going to happen if shit swings too far to the right. If shit swings too far to the right, it's also going to be a problem. Shit, that pendulum, like you were talking about Van Zealand and transurfing, life always has a way of bringing you back to the fucking middle. I don't care what it is. It seems like, you let me know if I'm wrong, Tim, but from my experience, it seems like life always has a way of bringing people, no matter what extreme you're on, it seems like it always has a way naturally to bring you back to this neutral state that Hawkins talks about, this neutrality state. And I think it's a great state to be in because it reflects, especially when you're going through an SP situation, because most people, when they're in SP situations, like I started to talk about earlier, you're not in a neutral state. You're in a very desperate state. If you're talking about pendulums, you're swung one way. And it's very dangerous when you have that pendulum swung one way and you're getting advice, kind of like E was talking about in our interview that we did with her. She said openly when she first found out about this, she didn't want to hear advice that went against what she wanted to hear. She wanted to hear advice that told her, oh, you're going to get your SP back. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. But she had to go through all of those stages before she got to that neutral stage to say, okay, I'm open to having a new SP. I'm open to experiencing this now. And eventually she got to that point. So getting to the neutral state is really good. It's really powerful. It's a great state to be in when you have that. She and E talked about it too, that effort mentality. I don't care. I'm good. I'm good with, I'm good without. That's the kind of state you hear us talked about. And that leads to a person being able to have that willingness to go on and to do what's necessary to then in return from willingness go up to acceptance, because that getting to that neutral state allows a person to be able to accept what has happened with their SP. And that just takes some time to get to, but you can go ahead and elaborate on that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I'm honestly like the numbers are kind of confusing me. And again, I love Hawkins. It's so funny we do these
Yeah.
videos. I knock his fucking map every single
Neutrality is
video.
250.
Yeah,
The
like
willingness is 310, and then acceptance is 350.
yeah, I mean, those numbers are arbitrary to me, honestly. Like
No, I
again,
agree.
like I think yeah, I just think I completely agree with you. Neutrality is inherent in life. I think that's why. See, for me, like, I don't mean to sound like just like a ridiculous asshole, like, but like I've been very much into spirituality from a pretty young age, since I was like a young teenager, 13, 14 years old. And the stuff that I really got into was really drawn to was the mystical Zen stuff, the Zen Buddhism and the Taoism. Now, in those traditions, generally speaking, neutrality, the way we're discussing it, is held in extremely high regard. And so that's always how I've kind of that shaped my spiritual outlook. I mean, I think I was drawn to that because that's what I could resonate with when I was that young. Like when I was young, I was like, this is right. And I got to tell you, basically 30 years later, I'm still like, yeah, that's right. Like it never changed. And so, and I spent a long time meditating in that way, and like, I lived at a Zen center. I was very much shaped by like the Zen perspective, and in part also I'd say this Taoist perspective, like the Tao Te Ching. And teachers like Byron Katie, like they later on, when I kind of became less interested in traditional Zen, like Byron Katie, I mean, she's married to she's a Zen lady, even though she's not anything, and but she's married to like a Zen guy. And Stephen Mitchell did a famous translation of the Tao Te Ching. Like that's always what rings true. So for me, when I found this LOA stuff, I was like, there's definitely something here. But I also knew right away, this is way too fucking extreme. This is not even enough a lot of the time. However, I was able to, I worked through that and used it in the way it worked for me. And when, you read like my books, Relax More, Try Less, like that's a very like Zen Taoist interpretation of Neville is relax more, try less. And books like Law of Attraction Simplified, you know, a book I wrote in 2021, is very Zen compared to most LOA books. But Marv, you know, doing the coaching with you and just being more on YouTube the last couple of years and being on Reddit, I see the extremes. And that's, I think, one big thing about our channels and what we do when we coach people, especially with SP stuff, is like we get you back to that more neutral space, because almost everything you see on YouTube and Reddit is an extreme. It's
That's a
not
fact.
going to be your situation in all likelihood. Like 1% of the time, for 1% of people, maybe it will be, maybe 2%, but for most people, it's not nearly going to be as extreme as that. And it's going to be like, it's not about like these fantastic manifestation stories. And again, you know, look at our talk with E the other day. E had some crazy shit happen, like, you know, with people she was close to, like, you know, going to the casino and winning, like, you know, people just approaching her on the street. Marvin and I hear stories like that a lot. And we're saying that is not how this stuff is going to deeply affect you long term. That stuff is like a side effect. The deeper thing is the peace and that sense of neutrality and willingness to be like, today is today. I'm okay. And like, and there's a peace here, you know, that I can recognize that's always here. That's the deep shit. And that's, in my opinion, what links a lot of this LOA stuff with these other branches of spirituality, like Zen, Taoism, stuff like that. But yeah, I do think it's important to mention that like most of the LOA stuff we see is an extreme side of the pendulum. It's not good. And that's one reason we like Hawkins. I think both of us is because he's not that, despite a lot of the crazy shit he says, and we all say crazy shit, right? Because again, I'm knocking him a lot in this video, but we also crazy. He very much keeps it in the middle of the pendulum most of the time. And you know what I mean? Despite all the muscle calibration or whatever, like it's still like, okay, you're human. You're human. You know, I think Byron Katie, I'm paraphrasing her, but it's like, she's like, don't try to, evolve beyond your evolution, or,
Right.
pretend you're something you're not, basically. And like, that's what I think a lot of these LOA people do. Like, people are like, I'm always in bliss. I'm in bliss. Oh, I'm in the void state. Do you really think that's not on one extreme? Right?
It's on one extreme for sure.
Yeah. So that's my 29 cents.
That's funny. I'm in the void state. That you know what's funny? That reminds me of somebody who was in our SP mastermind, and you'll know who I'm talking about. Remember, this person said that they they did so well in our mastermind and they grew so much so fast that it actually made them hit a wall.
Of course. I knew,
And
I basically knew that something like that was going to happen. Like, that wasn't a surprise at all. Like,
right. And but it was the way that they said it was so profound. It I don't remember exactly how they said it, but it was basically along the lines of they working with us helped them out so much that it ended up actually hurting them in a weird way. And I don't know if you want to say it's because they went to that extreme, like how you were talking about. They went way too extreme to one side potentially. Maybe that was it. But I don't remember. Do you remember how they worded it, Tim? I don't remember how they put it into
no,
words.
I
I
know
might
what
be
you're talking
butchering this.
about, but no, I know what you're talking about. But it's the kind of thing I've seen that with clients over the years. And it's whenever someone is too like, whenever someone, quite frankly, is like, I've got it. I've figured it out now, like on YouTube. I cracked the code to the law of assumption. It's like, get ready for your fall, motherfucker. That's all I gotta say. I would never say shit like that.
Right.
Like, it blows my mind. The hubris in this community is just crazy. Again, successful people, when they talk like that, Donald Trump accepted, like, usually, like, it doesn't work long term, like it it means their self-concept in some way is flawed. Like, because like reassurance comes from within. You don't have to promote it all the time. Not that you can't promote it at all. You should promote it some, I think, a lot of the time. But I've said this many times, Marv. Like, some of the most spiritually in tune people I've met, or like that, I just felt like, wow, they're really like they're really with it. you basically would have no fucking idea. Like, or they're just so down to like they're so grounded that if you would have an idea, you're just like, man, they're way out there. But they're certainly not like, oh, look what I did. You know what I mean? It's more just like how they
Right.
carry themselves, you know, like uh but yeah, I mean, this is obviously a much more enjoyable part of the map to talk about than the shame, the fear, the regret. I forget the lower ones, but you know,
Yeah, apathy, grief, fear,
apathy,
desire,
yeah,
anger.
apathy, right? Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's like I said, neutrality gets you to that is the stepping stone to that willingness state that Hawkins talks about, gets you willingness. And I guess you can say the willingness to accept
right.
whatever it is that you dealt with in the past and what you're possibly going to deal with in the present and going forward potentially. And it helps set you up, which obviously right above that, those two comes reason and love. Reason is right above acceptance, and then love is above reason. And when you think about it in that sense, it kind of you start to see why he leveled it in a certain way because
Yes,
you need to get to neutrality and then the willingness to accept. And then that acceptance allows you to start to reason and say, oh, maybe this happened with my SP because of this. Maybe I also did this with this because it's my fault. And you start to be able to logically reason because when you're in the lower paradigm, you're not logically reasoning with yourself or with your SP or anything. You're you're arguing with yourself a lot of times. You're arguing with your SP energetically, like you said, you were talking about earlier, Tim. Your pendulum is swung all the way to one side, and the more neutral you get, the more you start to be able to accept and you start to reason, which then allows you to start looking at your SP and say, you know what, I can start to give you love now because I realize that I'm in a neutral state. I realized my mistakes I made. I realized maybe you didn't make mistakes that I thought you made. It was just my perception or whatever. Like Neville says, there's no one to change but self. So when I changed myself, my perception about you actually started to change in return. And then I was able to accept what happened between us. I was able to reason it. And now I can sit here and say, you know what? I forgive you. I love you. I wish the best.
I mean, that's so beautifully said. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Again, the map's great from like again a figurative perspective, because that makes total sense. One thing I want to mention. So, like, what is wait? Reason's a number. That's what we're
Reason is
going.
400,
400, right? So this
right
is
above
this is
acceptance.
this is important, I think, or just because it's so under discussed in the community, and
And
that's
then
why
love is 5. Love is
love said
500.
5, right? And then peace is 600 or something like that, or what is it?
Joy is after love at 540, and then peace is 600, and then the ultimate one is enlightenment at 700.
Ah! um,
Nirvana.
Nirvana. Uh, yeah, no, I mean, this is important to say. I loved how you just described it, like that kind of process. Like, you know,
Right,
often talk with clients. We've been to be in the last couple months, like the 5 stages of grief or whatever. And this is it's
right.
almost similar to that in a way. But I do think, I mean, again, it's been fun to kind of talk about this because it's like a contrarian take on LOA. A huge problem in the LOA community, law of assumption community, is the lack of reason, where people poo-pooing reason. And like, I can't tell you how many times I've seen comments of like, well, that's fine that like you logically made sense of it, but the law of assumption has nothing to do with logic. And it's like, you know, to paraphrase Coué, it's like, just because you don't understand something doesn't mean it's not so, you know, like, and Coué is the
Right.
guy who got better results than any of these teachers that came after him, including Neville with people. Reason is a huge ally. Okay, if we utilize reason, then stuff that perhaps does not make reasonable sense, like E getting 2 phone calls from her SP the 2 times that I speak to her in the last 2 months that same day, happens. But reason helps us get to that point, like weird stuff like that happening. And Coué really emphasized reason a lot, and Maxwell Maltz, the psychocybernetics author and teacher, really emphasized reason. They are two distinct exceptions I can think of because, yeah, I mean, a lot of these teachers are not leaning on reason, and I think they're using too much spiritual language. And spiritual language can be great. I love spiritual language, but reason and being able to like look at your behavior with a sense of objectivity and neutrality and be like, oh yeah, I see how I behaved. I see why they acted the way they behaved. Uh, I see how I can do better. I see how I can be more giving to this person or to this situation or what have you. And also I see how it's okay that I acted this way and I can give myself compassion because I'm only human. That kind of reasoning, that kind of rationality, that kind of like, oh, let me think about what I really deeply care about and focus on that, which is what Coué and especially Maxwell Maltz always talked about. Maxwell Maltz said, get super clear on what you really want, be very rational about what you really want, and then feel your way, imagine your way into it, and fail your way to it, right? Use your reasoning skills and your imagination to fail your way to success. Like this is like the big time shit. I get amped talking about this stuff. And I honestly just the law of assumption discussions, the law of attraction discussions in the popular Abraham Hicks and Neville spaces is like it's like grade school shit compared to this. And that's not to say that Abraham Hicks or Neville are grade school. They're not, but their followings, like they don't talk about this shit in this way, about using rationality. I'm telling most of our clients, especially SP clients, be more fucking rational about this. Stop talking about fucking the law of assumption. Be fucking rational. What would you do if they were if the roles were reversed here? If you were in their shoes, how do you think you would feel? Right? And this is again comes back to the golden rule. So reason is a wonderful skill. We're way up the chart, now. We're way past.
And he talks and you can add to this too. He talks about that reason and stuff and love. Now you're in peak performance without stress.
Yeah,
That's what he labels that as.
I like that. That's phenomenal. That makes sense because it's like I'm doing the best I can. I'm giving, not taking. I'm giving out the best I can. I'm what would be the word? Performing to the best of my ability, and whatever happens, happens.
No stress.
No stress. No stress there. If you don't have a choice, there's no stress. And what is it that Hawkins says somewhere else? We like to paraphrase it. It's like, um, you know, happiness or something is getting what you want, and stress is not getting what you want.
Not getting what you want.
Yeah, like it's like that. So, Hawkins has all these great lines about that. For those of you who haven't looked too, there's a lot of good YouTube short videos of David Hawkins speaking, and he's a funny guy, but he really captures the human experience well, and in a lot of what he's saying and what we're discussing here, trying to illustrate a little bit.
And that reason and that reason and that love is what allows you to move up the scale to joy, peace, and enlightenment. Because joy is third from the top, peace is second from the top, and then enlightenment is number one. So once you reach acceptance and willingness, your logical mind turns on and you start to reason with yourself. You start to reason and say, you know what, I can forgive them for X, Y, and Z. I can forgive myself for X, Y, and Z. I can love them now. And now that you can love yourself and love your SP, now in turn, that brings you joy. That starts to bring you joy because now you are looking at things in an unconditional manner potentially. And you could say, I'm joy because I'm no longer worried about what situation was 5 years ago or last year or whatever happened. I'm no longer worried about my sins. I'm no longer worried about, as Neville would say, missing the mark. I'm not worried about my SP missing the mark because I've reasoned now and I'm displaying love. So now I'm joyful about it and I wish my SP well wherever they're at. And then the very act of you doing that puts you in the state of peace because now you're at peace with the situation. You are at peace, and then there's nothing else left to happen but enlightenment. What's that that you know better than me, Tim, that Buddha story, Buddha's sitting under the tree and he becomes enlightened
The morning
after,
star, the morning star,
yeah,
or whatever it is.
just
Yeah.
just sitting there because he's at peace, and that's ultimately what you want to get to. Wherever you at in your SP journey, you're gonna most likely experience all of these stages. There's a good chance you're gonna experience all these stages. A good chance you're gonna start at the bottom, and work your way up to the top.
or at least be at the
And
bottom some of the time, you know.
yeah, oh yeah, for sure. And you'll vacillate back and forth
Exactly. That we
between.
really have to underscore that again. I mean, we've been trying
Yeah,
to, but like it's not, and Hawkins too. It's not. He's not nearly as dogmatic when you just read him or hear him. Like he's talking about how
right,
we're going up and down, and up. You know what I mean? Like we're vacillating, and that's
right.
all. That's part of the experience. Yeah.
And that, like I said, that joy that you feel is basically from letting a lot of shit go. And that peace that you feel is basically from letting a lot of shit go. And then that enlightenment is you realizing that, in my opinion, you let me know how you feel, Tim, is that when you become enlightened and you deal with relationships and you deal with things in life, you realize that a lot of things, and it's always typically in hindsight, which is why a person has to a lot of times go through the stages so they can, it takes a real special person to not have to go through these stages to already know this type of stuff. Some people, they don't have to experience these levels, and they'll just be able to, I don't know, get it. They'll be a mystic. They'll, whatever you want to call them.
Right.
But
They'll start at love or whatever, and just never really go
yeah,
down. But I've
right,
never met anybody like that. I'll say that.
right, exactly. Me neither. But I mean, I'm sure they're out there somewhere.
Right.
But um, enlightenment, in hindsight, a lot of times people look back and they're enlightened from hindsight. They realize a lot of the shit that they went through in relationships or whatever they were mad at, it was bullshit. You realize a lot of the stuff that you're dealing with at the time, yeah, it was such a big deal. But then looking back, you realize, oh man, this stuff's not even, I don't even care about this like I did when it happened. Yeah, it could, 30 days from now, you're not even gonna care about stuff like you did. I mean, we talk to people all the time. Tell me we work with them immersively or in our mastermind. And pretty much whatever bothered them that their SP did last month or months ago, they don't care anymore.
Exactly.
They're
Moved on.
they're over it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're over it. And in fact, they, even if their SP did something bad, they still wish that they reached out to them. You know what I mean? They still want to hear from them, even though something bad went down or whatever the case may be. So to me, that's a huge part of enlightenment at the top of the scale is when you realize all of these things that you're going through in your relationship are trivial in the grand scheme of things. A lot of them. I'm not gonna say all of them. You'll realize, you'll know whatever lines are crossed. Tim and I were talking to a client the other day about that. You'll know when serious lines are being crossed. But a lot of this stuff, when you become enlightened, you wake up and you realize a lot of this stuff that people get mad at in relationships. Oh, you drive this way. Oh, you do this way. Oh, you never turn the light off. Oh, you never do this. Oh, you'll realize how dumb, how futile a lot of arguments were that you go through in relationships. And then you look back and you wish, you know what, I really wish I didn't get that mad at that thing. Tim and I on the other day were on a call talking about road rage. Talking about somebody getting angry in a car, and you realize, but again, that comes with the forgiving, that comes with the reason, because it's you run into somebody in road rage and stuff like that. When you start to logically reason, you start to be, like the Bible says, slow to anger. You start to get slow to anger because you're reasoning now. You're on that level where you're reasoning and you're saying, you know what, that person in that car that has road rage, who knows what just happened to him? He could have lost his mother. He could have lost a kid. He could have had some crazy traumatic thing that he went through that he never got over, and that manifested as road rage, or whatever issue he might have manifested in just talking crazy to coworkers at work, or whatever the case might be. You never know what people are going through. But again, in hindsight, a lot of times we figure these things out, and with enlightenment comes that. And so I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Tim. If not, that is all levels
That's the
of the
map.
map of
Wow.
consciousness.
All I would say is the enlightenment thing. I mean, I don't think that's even worth discussing, really. And Hawkins doesn't
Yeah,
actually,
because it's
from what I
very hard.
remember, it's okay. Hawkins is much better than these LOA people generally touching upon it because he's respectful. You know what I mean? Like he says we don't even know in a way, from what I remember at least. But all I will say on that is being into the mystical non-dual stuff for a long time, where frankly I think you're exposed to many more quote unquote enlightened people. It's absolutely nothing like the LOA stuff, the top
Right.
tier. Nothing like it. Nothing like it. I can't emphasize that
Yeah.
enough. And
I
so
think a lot of people wouldn't. I think a lot of people would have a hard time
no, they don't. They have no
actually
idea. They
grasping
have no
and
idea. No, they don't know.
applying
They don't know.
enlightenment.
They don't
They
know.
couldn't. I don't think they could do it.
No, they
I don't
would.
think they could
They'd
do it.
probably lose all interest in this LOA stuff.
Right.
Honestly,
Right.
I
Right.
mean,
Right. Right.
because the idea, you hear about I am a lot in LOA, you and often you hear like I push back against that a lot because I don't believe it in the way people talk about it. But it's more like the I drops away. If you want
Right.
some examples, like too, like if I always give these examples because I love these teachers, and I've talked to them before and gone retreats before with them. But like Byron Katie, I've already mentioned her a couple times. Read a book like A Thousand Names for Joy by Byron Katie, or there's a book by Jan Fraser, who I also love, called When Fear Falls Away. Those are two modern women. They're still alive, and the stuff they're talking about, I don't know. I hear the LOA stuff about enlightenment, and it doesn't sound like them. And what they're talking about, I can relate to. Something I do want to add to, Marv. One thing I've noticed for myself, and I think for a lot of people, is the longer you get into these ideas and quote unquote feel like you have more experiences up higher on the map or whatever, generally speaking, I think people get quieter. This is why, like you're talking about like Buddhism or wherever, like people spend more time meditating in silence. Hawkins isolated. Lester Levinson, who Hawkins was really close to, like they were talking a lot about, like in the 70s and 80s, like they were doing doomsday prophecy stuff, honestly. But they were talking about isolation and like how isolation is the way to enlightenment, whether you agree with that or not. But like that sentiment is like you become much less interested in the world, generally speaking.
I think there's truth in that.
And you become much less interested in your SP. You become much less interested, in my experiences, in yourself,
Right.
let
Yeah.
alone your SP. So it's like,
I agree with all of that.
yeah, I mean, that's the stuff I just don't think. This is stuff I love talking about, but like this is the kind of stuff in the LOA circles, I start talking like this,
This SP crowd doesn't want to hear that.
everybody gets quiet. Exactly.
Yeah,
People like,
they'll never experience it because, to me, in my opinion, most people will never experience enlightenment is because most people will hold on to their ego too much.
right.
And when you want to experience enlightenment, you have to, like you were saying earlier, Tim, you got to basically kill your ego. You become less interested. Tim
Or
just
it
said it
gets
perfectly.
taken from you. It's not all.
Yeah,
The other thing I'll say is a lot of these experiences, a lot of the teachers I've mentioned here, including Hawkins, a lot of unpleasant shit usually precedes it. Okay, it like we talk about the baby, the baby coming out of the womb and being above 500. That very rarely happens. Usually it's like a mental breakdown or some kind of severe suffering that precedes it. Not always, but again, yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, the LOA, not just the SP space, the LOA community, having made hundreds and hundreds of videos, whenever I get more into like this non-dual Zen stuff, there's almost never many comments, and there's far few people are viewing it. People are like, "Oh, why don't you talk about this stuff more?" I say, "Because no one's interested."
right. The market tells you what people are interested in.
Exactly. I want to help you. I want to talk. I've already written about this enough, talked about it enough. I want to help people integrate it, and help myself integrate it in my own life. So, working on relationships and the stuff in this 250 to 5 range, that's good. What we want to do with SP stuff generally is get from that below 200 range into more of this 2 to 500 range more of the time. And that's very doable. We'll help you do that. Because that's where it's at. This stuff you get above 500 to that other shit, you can't. That's not predictable. It's random too, man. Like,
But it's not even necessary.
it's not necessary. It's not. It's nothing to try for. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not. It's
Yeah.
not. You don't do it. You don't do it. It's just, yeah. But it's, yeah. It's we're a
That's a
long
good point,
ways
Tim.
from.
I wouldn't actively try to get to.
You can't do it. You
Yeah.
cannot do it. And I feel very firm about that. Obviously, I can be completely full of shit, but like you can't do it. That's why you hear all these Zen stories of like, oh, I try for 30 years to become enlightened, and no one knows the fuck that means, right? And then like something happens and they get enlightened. And, there's that great, like one of those great Zen stories. Like, well, what? How is it? And he's like, life is just as terrible as it was before. It's like that. Like, you don't fucking, like, people don't even want it.
Yeah.
Like Marv said.
Yeah. It's not something I would strive for. Like Tim said, I would strive to get
Just
out
be a
of the
good person.
be a good person, get out of the survival paradigm. I would definitely try to get out of that. And I would stay, like Tim said, in that 200 range and above, somewhere in that 2 to 500, ish, somewhere in there. And it can fluctuate. You can go down to the survival paradigm here and there, but you definitely don't want to make that your home.
Right.
But yeah, in the middle,
In
is
large part, I mean, what happens when you study this stuff is you realize that's a choice in a way. Okay, like
right,
it's
right.
much easier said than done. Okay, for fucking sure. It's much easier. It's like, oh, I don't want to be in the low paradigm anymore. And this is the the Neville people. Just stay above 200. Like it's not like that. But when you make a choice of like, I am going to be more forgiving to myself and others, you start becoming more neutral. And if you choose that day after day, you will, quote unquote, rise higher on the map and get above 200 more of the time. So
Well said, man. Here comes the man in white. Galaxy, no, LOA Defenders.
oh yeah, they just start doing those numbers in these videos. Yes, that's it. That's Hawkins. Wow.
Hawkins, man, we did it. Finished the map of consciousness.
Unbelievable.
Men of consciousness in white.
Man of consciousness. That's the title of the video.